I don't think students are afraid of AI. I think they're afraid that AI will get things wrong.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Willsea, bringing nearly 20 years of edtech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday I'll break down what actually matters, fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. On today's episode, we've got an exclusive first look at new research on what high school seniors really think about AI. And here's the paradox. They're cool asking ChatGPT for college essay help, but want a real person reviewing their application. This isn't about fear. It's about trust, control, and context. And today we're breaking down the contradictions, the trust gaps, and what colleges need to rethink before they deploy that next AI-powered message. And I've got the authors of this new research here with me to help make sense of it all. Jeremy Tiers is the Vice President of Admissions Services at Tudor Collegiate Strategies, where he's spent the last decade helping enrollment teams better connect, communicate, and lead. He hosts the popular Mission Admissions podcast on Enrollify, where he talks with practitioners about what's really working with Gen Z. Simply put, he lives and breathes the student perspective. And Harrison Soup Campbell is also here, a former Dean of Admissions and now the head of Community Experience at ZeeMee. He's been leveraging social media to connect with students since the MySpace days, and today he helps institutions engage Gen Z on the platforms they actually use. Together, they're not just observers of Gen Z behavior, they're architects of how we engage them. And today, Jeremy and Soup are here to help us unpack what students really think about AI in their college journey. Jeremy, Soup, welcome to the Pulse. Now, we've established you two live in the Gen Z trenches more than most. What's the last moment that made you stop and think, yes, we are indeed marketing to a different generation now? Jeremy?
So this happens every day, Mallory, because I have a 15-and-a-half-year-old daughter. And so I just, for fun, like to joke around with her. And so this morning, for example, she's coming down the stairs getting ready to school. And I'm like, nice fit, Olivia. And she literally rolled her eyes at me and was like, Dad, like, I really hope you don't say stuff like that when you're like working at these schools. And I'm like, I do it all the time, Olivia. Come on. So I've got my own focus group, one of one every day,
Love it.
Mallory.
Love it. And Soup, welcome to the Pulse. What's your moment?
I'll tell you, I'll share with you one of the roles that I get to play at ZeeMee is I still train basically thousands of current college students that serve as their school's official student influencers, like in their communities.
Nice.
And I've lately been questioning, why is one of the oldest people at this company the one that's like getting on these belts? And I can literally, when I'm doing these trainings, I can see them just rolling their eyes like, he's explaining to us how a reply feature works in a messaging app. Like, we don't. And so now I just like make fun of myself as the dinosaur in the space and like just joke with the students. But yes, I'm always, in every one of those trainings, I'm reminded of just how old I am at this point.
Age is but a number, okay? I love it. I love it. Well, this survey that the two of you have deployed is so interesting, and I am so grateful that you are giving Higher Ed Pulse listeners this first look at the research. So friends, let's dive in. You are getting this exclusive look from more than 8,700 high school senior responses on how they feel about AI in the college search. And I think the goal is to get to over 10,000. So this is a really, this is not a small sample size here. Now, the headline and takeaway from my review, they're using AI all the time, but they don't trust it when colleges use it on them. So for example, 65% of respondents said they'd be less trusting of a school that used AI to review their admission application. But it's not because AI is scary, it's because it's inconsistent. And according to the survey, their top concerns are around inaccuracy and bias. So if that's your biggest fear, it makes total sense to me that you wouldn't want AI making admission or financial aid decisions for you. So in short, I don't think students are afraid of AI. I think they're afraid that AI will get things wrong. And so then it tracks that 9 out of 10 survey respondents said they'd rather communicate with a real person if given the choice. Gen Z might be comfortable using AI for information, but not for intimacy. They don't want a bot breaking down tuition options or navigating sensitive conversations. In my personal opinion, this data reveals a fascinating gap between behavior and belief. Here's the hidden insight. Students say they prefer real humans, but if they're waiting days for a reply or can't find clear information, I think they're going to go wherever they'll get the answers the fastest. Their expectations are rising even if trust hasn't caught up yet. And this brings me back to my conversation with Dr. Ed Campbell on last week's episode of The Pulse. I think he said it perfectly, and the data this week proves it. Transparency matters. Students already assume you're using AI, so hiding it just erodes trust further. So, how should enrollment and marketing leaders make sense of all of this information? And what can we actually do with the data, especially when it challenges what we think students want? And that is exactly where Jeremy and Soup come in. So, okay, guys, we're going to start here. From your perspective, what was the biggest surprise in the survey results? And what stood out to you as maybe a potential blind spot for institutions? Soup, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of things in there that surprised me. I think I went into this with a lot of assumptions, right? Like that we can often do. And so I think one of the great things about us over at ZeeMee is we do have like the, millions of these students like right here in our, like, so we could just ask. So like, I was like, I just want to ask these students. Like, I don't want to assume any more of what I think. And so a lot of the responses really shocked me. I mean, I just picked one out. Well, there's two. I'll give you two quickly. One of the open-ended, so we did ask a question like they allowed them to do open-ended responses. One of the things that overwhelmingly I saw many of them mention was the environmental impact. I didn't even know that. Like, I didn't even understand that. Like, so that was something that I started to do more research in, and these big, massive data centers that exist to have to process all of these calls. And so that was interesting to me. But more on the topic of the questions that we asked them, I think there was one question around, like, if you had to schedule a call with a college or university, which would you prefer? Would you prefer to conduct that with a real person, talking to someone there that's real? Or would you prefer to kind of conduct that call with kind of the AI persona agent type thing? And that one was like 95% are saying we still want to talk to a real person if we've got to make that call. So like that was something that shocked me that I just thought was, I just assumed it would be much more balanced, like that they would be fine talking to any type of persona that would give them the information that they needed. So that was one that really stood out and caught my attention.
I am excited to dig more into the talk to a human versus AI with the two of you in a few minutes. But on your point about the environmental impact, I was just at dinner last night and we were talking about how I think Sam Altman recently came out, or somebody, maybe it wasn't ChatGPT, but somebody recently came out and was like, stop being polite to AI because of the environmental impact. Every time you end that response like with an extra thank you response, it takes more processing power for the AI to reply. And it was like, if you could just cut out the thank you, the lone thank you, it would have like an immediate environmental positive impact. I thought that was really, really funny. All right, Jeremy, what was surprising to you in this data?
So for me, Mallory, it was seeing that 86% of seniors say that they're convinced some or in some cases all of the emails and text messages they're getting from colleges and universities are being generated by AI. And what the three of us and many of the listeners know is the reality is very few admissions and enrollment marketing teams are actually using AI to, be a content tool or a writing tool. And so Students are basically telling us, boy, these emails feel so robotic and so formal and impersonal that, like, God, this must have been done by AI. And so a human would definitely do a better job than this. And to me, this hopefully will be, in some cases, the tipping point for all these conversations we've had around personalization and being conversational and just talking like a normal human. Because again, they think it's being written by AI. No, it's actually being written by humans. And if they're telling us it's not very good and it's this, I really hope that's going to be a wake-up call, Mallory, to a lot of these people that say we've got to then figure out, and it's not hard because all the data's out there, how to get past this fear that so many writers, enrollment marketers, and admissions counselors tell me, where they're like, God, I don't want to sound like I'm just having a conversation with them and sound like I'm too relaxed because that makes me unprofessional. And I'm like, no. It does the exact opposite. It makes you relatable and believable, which is exactly what your target audience needs from you.
Want to know what AI-powered people-focused really looks like? The 2025 Engage Summit will show you how AI transforms engagement without losing the human touch. Join us June 24th and 25th in Charlotte, North Carolina for actionable insights, hands-on demos, and transformative strategies. Enrollify listeners save $50 with the code Enrollify50. Sign up at engage.element451.com. Yes, clip that one for the LinkedIn video post. I mean, really though, it is probably very frustrating for many of our listeners to hear that this is the perspective when we know a lot of the technology in this industry hasn't actually caught up to integrate AI into it. And so therefore, the teams on campuses, maybe they're ideating in a third-party AI tool, but the reality is they're still writing those emails, not by hand, but, by click. So yes, that one stuck out to me too. Another stat that really stuck out to me was around financial aid. And on a scale of 10, the average response was 3.9 when students were asked if they'd be open to talking about money with a bot. What's that telling us about the emotional boundaries students are placing around AI, and how should colleges respect those lines? Soup, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think it all comes back to that trust and transparency, right? And so I think, to me, when I look at all of this, like, to me, I try to look at it at a very high level, right? And I think anytime new technology has presented itself, there's ways we can leverage it, right? And so I think historically, even in higher ed, when I go back and think about, when social media first became a thing, it was pure. It was based on relationship, connection. But Mallory, you know this because we go back to the early days in higher ed when we were first leveraging those platforms.
Age is but a number, Soup.
Yeah. And it was beautiful in those early days of leveraging that way. But what happened over time? Our marketing and communication folks they turn into ad platforms. It's like, well, if the students are on this platform, let's go there and blast our brand and that's not what it was intended. Another similar one that I always mention is the rise of CRMs in higher ed enrollment. Like, none of us today would ever say we would try to do this stuff without CRMs, right? Because it makes things easier, more efficient, faster. We can do it at scale. But then there's also consequences of that. Like, on the student side, now they're getting 10,000 emails spammed to their inbox, every day so like, for me personally, it's always thinking of when new technology emerges, even if it makes my life easier, I always want to make sure we're examining the impact that it truly will have for students. And so, yes, if we feel right now that they're a little hesitant, that there's this fear, they want to make sure things are transparent, I think that's what we're hoping that we can help our colleagues and our friends in the higher ed industry understand. Just however we're going to leverage this, let's always see it through the lens of that student and make sure we're really meeting the needs that they have. And so, yeah, there's a little gap there right now. I think we can close that gap in the coming years. And then again, I think, in the student's defense, Jeremy and we were talking about this with Bart Kaler here recently, who's one of, Bart and Brian Piper. These are guys I really respect in our space. But we were talking about, again, just that trust, and that many of these students, have had teachers kind of on them like, this stuff is cheating. Many of our students are coming from a mindset of they're fearful of it because they've kind of been programmed like this stuff, we don't use this. You're cheating if you're using this. So like we've got to overcome that hurdle as well here in the coming year. So those are just, some of my thoughts around it.
Yeah, I would 100% back to the financial aid component of it, Mallory, say, well, like none of us in the first place likes to talk about money anyways. It's uncomfortable for all of us as adults, as young people. And young people, I also don't think, nor should they in most cases, have any true comprehension of like the financial impact of a college decision and like how they obviously see the news and they read things online. But at the end of the day, right, financial aid is a topic that, unlike dorms and campus life or like, other topics where you can speak in generalizations, talking about money is so individual and family specific that like there's so many different factors that like make the numbers different. And so back to the trust component that Soup alluded to, that you've alluded to, Mallory, I mean, at the end of the day, how is an AI tool, I'm sure this is what students think, at least what I've seen from my data, in addition to this survey, when we've asked certain questions on other surveys I've done, do they truly feel like all of the data points that, for example, go into a financial aid package can be understood the correct way, right, by AI? Because right or wrong, I think, again, they don't feel like AI is reliable as a human right now. And so, they're worried, oh my God, you're going to tell me it costs this much. And then like somebody from the school like is going to call me or like talk to me a month later and go, no, it actually costs this. And I'm all worried that it's going to be a lot more than what the AI. And so I think, again, there's a lot of that what if game in their head that they play, and they're just back to inaccuracy and trust. They're concerned that we're not talking about a couple $100 or like $20. We're talking about like $20,000, maybe more. And so, gosh, I want to make sure that whatever the amount is, like we know what that amount is. We're not waffling and going back and forth.
Yeah, you just highlighted it. Inaccuracy and bias are their biggest concerns. Clearly, that came out in the survey data, and more than half of the respondents feel like AI is creepier than it is cool. So you put all of that together with something as high stakes as, financial aid. They're afraid AI is going to get it wrong, and they have more trust that the human is going to get it right. Or at least I think as humans, we can feel like we can reason with the other human more than we can reason with the bot on the other side. And I think the three of us, as well as many listeners, continue to have challenging interactions with the AI bots that are deployed in, from airlines or, the different websites that we interact with a lot. And so it all tracks and I think makes sense. And the end of the day, the big takeaway from this conversation is be transparent. And as and maybe it just takes time, but as AI builds more trust with us, then we will start to trust it more. I do want to go back, Soup, to something that you said a few minutes ago around who the student prefers to talk to, the human or the bot, right? And more than 90% of your respondents say that they want to talk to a real person. I think anybody given that question is going to say they would prefer to talk to a real person. So if we know, though, that they're waiting days and days for an answer, like the reality is sometimes it takes 2 to 3 weeks for some of our overburdened higher ed colleagues to reply to these inquiries, right? Then that student is going to disengage. So how do we balance the desire for human connection that the students are clamoring for with the expectation of instant service?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, for me, this is where you'll see me kind of get on my soapbox here a little bit. Again, when I think about the way we're still conducting higher ed enrollment management, we really haven't changed a lot over the years, right? We're still kind of traditionally doing it the same way. We still have fall travel season. We're still sending all of our counselors out to try to get into the high school. We're having them sit at college fairs for 4 hours. Email is still the primary means of communication. Okay. You find me a 17-year-old today, right now, that will tell me hey, email's my preferred means that me and my friend, we email each other every day. Like, that's how we communicate. So for
You
me,
should have asked that on your survey.
exactly.
Darn it.
Well, for me, like, that's really the biggest issue. As an industry, we've not made the shift. Again, like, that's why we built ZeeMee, right? Like, that's why we built the platform where you can be in constant communication with all of your students. And Mallory, I was just talking about this yesterday. One of the examples I've been using when I talk to a lot of even our current college partners now that are using ZeeMee, that still kind of the light bulb hasn't fully gone off. I'm giving them the scenario of, imagine sending one of your counselors to a college fair. The doors open, 13,000 students rush to your table, which that would be insane if that happened. And they're all excited. They're right there in your presence. They want to ask questions. They want to get feedback. But imagine in that scenario, the counselor just turned their back to them and never even engaged or responded. And so that's like in these community platforms, and ZeeMee's not the only one. I mean, there are communities, there are Discord communities, but to me, that's where you can be in a place where you can be constantly connected with all of your students. And so if you have that type of scenario, you can be available to them. And so to me, that's the biggest shift, I think, like, that we still need to make. But you're right, to your point, today students don't want to wait 30 seconds. Like if I've got a question, I just want to DM my counselor, and my counselor like hit me back and let me know what's going on. Like, I don't want to do this emailing back and forth, waiting, 4 days to get a response. And so to me, like, that's the biggest problem. But you're right. Like, we need to find ways. And I think absolutely AI right now can fill a gap of stepping into places where if a student's got just that general question, they can quickly get some information. But to me, how quickly can we get them routed to be connected to that real individual, to establish that connection and relationship, to me is the key.
Yeah. Jeremy, you're on campuses all the time working with admission teams who are on the front lines of communicating with these high school seniors. Is the data lining up to what you're hearing on the streets? And, what's your take on this balance for the desire of talking to a human, but also the expectation that you're going to get the answer immediately?
Well, Soup said it. I think it starts with colleges doing a better job of looking at how they can do those FAQs better, and AI can absolutely help with a lot of that. And I think we all know what the FAQs are because we get asked them year after year after year in so many situations. Where I want to go, though, a little bit, Mallory, is maybe a little different because of, to your point, what I see when I'm on all these campuses and leading all these trainings. What I think a lot of what we're talking about here reinforces is this idea that when I'm on a campus, one of the top things that I constantly get asked about, Mallory, during trainings, especially one-on-one meetings I do, is, Jeremy, can you help me plan my day? Can you help me organize my to-do list? And I'll tell you, Mallory, at no fault of their own in some cases, there are so many people at admissions offices working extremely, not a little inefficiently, extremely inefficiently, right? Because I don't have, for example, in my day-to-day, we'll say, client base, for example, that would equate to like an admitted student pool right now, but I do a lot of I'm able to get back at worst within 24 hours and have for 10 years of doing what I'm doing. CRM technology absolutely allows for some of this stuff to be automated. We have to take more advantage of that. We're not doing it. And you can 100% personalize, right, when you mass message. But I just feel like we have to teach staff how to organize their day better. I would argue every single day that you're not traveling, and even if you are traveling, for example, in the fall or spring, you should be, as an admissions counselor, spending some amount of time on what I call personalized and intentional outreach. Some days it might be 4 students. Some days it might be 9 students and 7 parents. Some days it might be 50, depending on how much. The number is irrelevant, but there shouldn't be a day that goes by where that inbox, right, if you're getting questions from students and families, isn't literally 1A or 1B, if you want my opinion, as an admissions counselor, in terms of like how you're managing your territory. And so I think we have to emphasize understanding how to utilize our time better. But then the other thing is basic things, Mallory. Like, I use templates all the time. And back to FAQs, admissions counselors are getting a lot of the same questions.
Absolutely.
Right? Don't rethink the wheel. I don't want you to have to write 29 responses to 29. Literally, you may have to change one or two things to make it more personal and relevant to each student. Fine. But like if you could use templates, like I have a folder and I absolutely use templates in my day-to-day. And so I think in addition to all the things you and Supa both said, part of that is at play with this. And so I think if we could structure our days a little bit better working in higher ed, we'd be able to get to a lot more of those responses faster. And then if we took advantage of technologies like, listen, we have some amazing CRMs, no shock to the three of us. 98% of schools aren't using 98% of the capacity of their CRM.
Very true. Very true. Thank you for bringing us to the root problem. I appreciate that. So let's wrap this one up, guys. I want to know, in your expert opinion, what is one thing colleges can start doing maybe this spring, but certainly by this fall, based on the findings of your research, or what is one thing that they need to absolutely avoid doing?
I mean, I would tell you a couple of things jump right off the page to me, and they're no different than whether the topic is AI or other things that admissions and enrollment marketing teams talk about each year. Mallory, have a conversation about this intentionally as a team. Like, sit down and make this okay, we know AI is not going anywhere. In fact, it's only going to go up and increase more in terms of usage, and like the tools are only going to get better and smarter. Let's talk about like what we could be doing now. We don't have to change everything completely now, but like what are some of the things we should be doing? And you as an admissions counselor, where are some of the issues you see with this? And then utilize the focus groups that you have. I mean, sure, ZeeMee has hundreds of thousands of like students. They can focus group whenever they want. But as a college campus, you have tens of thousands, or at worst, thousands in most cases, of students on your campus. Like, do some surveys specific to AI and communication with your students. But I think it starts by just having a conversation, right, Mallory? And then I would also say, like, if we needed another reason to go back and audit all of our communications and make sure, back to one of the first points I made, that they don't sound completely robotic, and like, here's another reason why you probably need to do that. Because I had Mickey Baines and his son Reese on my podcast recently for a follow-up episode. And one of the things Reese, who's a high school junior, and his dad talked about was, listen, if he ignores as a teenager the first couple of emails a college sends, no matter how hard they try after the fact to maybe change the way they're communicating, it's going to be really hard to get him to pay attention to like number 4 or 5 and like 12 and 15. And so those first touch points, when all these students come into the funnel differently, I think we really need to take a hard look at those as well.
I would just say never forget about the true human relational aspect of the work we do. I mean, if you work in higher ed at all, this is a relationship industry, and what our superpower is our ability to actually have great human connections and relationships. And so as more and more technology emerges, just keep in mind that we need to leverage that technology to get us back to more and more of those opportunities for that human engagement, because that's really our superpower. And just avoid, like, the big thing for me, again, I'll stress, like, let's always try to see things through the lens of students. And that's like, it's easy for us to adopt technology and things that can make our lives easier, but let's always remember and focus on what is the impact these things have for students, and really see it through their lens, and then truly try to leverage the technology that can best benefit our students. Even if that means we sacrifice a little bit of this could make my life easier doing it this way, but I always want to make sure the student is the focus, and how we leverage these tools would be my big takeaway.
Absolutely. Bringing it back to transparency, trust building, and remembering that students aren't afraid of AI. They're afraid it'll get things wrong. On top of those last pieces of advice from Jeremy and Soup, I think that's the perfect way to wrap this episode up, guys. I so appreciate you being here and giving our listeners that exclusive first look on the survey data. Friends, we will catch you next week on Higher Ed Pulse. Bye-bye. The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.